Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest issue of Comic Book Gentlemen, the podcast where we use our decades of being giant nerds to discuss the most divisive issues in our fandom. I'm your host, Greg, joined by constant host, Dave.
Hello.
And we have a guest with us today. Yes.
Hi.
Okay, give us a little introduction of yourself. How's it going today?
Hi, I'm Melanie. I am a new Marvel Comics nerd and a TikToker of all things. Yeah, I'm here. And I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so we were really excited to have you on. Obviously, you and Dave have known each other for a while.
A few years.
Yeah, so he's been like, yeah, let's get Melanie on. She's brand new to the comics at least.
He does like me.
I didn't say that.
Let's keep this professional.
Fair enough. But yeah, we thought it was a great opportunity to kind of go over, like, what is it like being a new comic book fan, especially in this era? Because, like, when Dave and I first started reading, like, we didn't have the MCU, we didn't have the same level of TV that we had. So it's really interesting to hear about new fans getting into the comics and whatnot. And yeah, we also, as you can see from the title of the podcast, we're also going to give mine and Dave's recommendations for you to check out, and everybody listening who hasn't checked out and whatnot. Can't wait. Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I think you and I might disagree on a couple, but we'll see.
We always disagree on that.
That's true. That's kind of the point of the podcast. So we'll see. But yeah, let's start with the very beginning. So what is your experience with, comic books in general? What got you into reading them specifically?
Right. So, well, I've been a nerd my whole life. Growing up, I watched, X-Men, like the 90s X-Men cartoon and X-Men Evolution were big ones for me. The old Spider-Man cartoon, things like that. So I've always kind of been in Marvel a little bit. And then obviously that all ramped up when the MCU started. I saw Iron Man in theater with my dad back when that first came out. And it kind of just spiraled from there. So I've always kind of had Marvel in my life that way. Comic book wise, I read so much manga in high school. I was a big manga kid, and then I know you're shaking your head.
Meanwhile, Dave's shaking his head. I'm nodding my head.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah.
See, there's the
difference.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I read stuff like that when I was in high school and a little bit, into my 20s, and then I've read various graphic novels over the years too, and so. The Marvel Universe especially to me was always really intimidating because it's huge. So, I thought about wanting to get into it for years and I never knew where to start and I never knew where to go with it. And so finally, I actually think it was one of your guys' episodes where you're talking about that Marvel Unlimited thing. And so finally this year I was like, you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet and just do it. So I signed up and just started basically.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We really need to get a sponsorship of Marvel Unlimited because we've promoted that so much.
Yes, because it is the best.
It's so good.
Apparently, Comixology used to be good until Amazon ruined it. So we'll see.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing tool because even for myself, I collect a lot of comics, but there's a lot of comics I don't collect.
Okay.
I never was heavy into stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy or Black Panther, or because it was either they were fairly new and it was just something I just didn't get into, or Black Panther, which they published way back in the day, and then have kind of restarted them over and over and over and over and over again, and it was just something that I just never got into, but I always enjoyed the comics. So, that app is amazing for even longtime readers like myself, because it's got everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Marvel.
Yeah.
Well, and it's great for me because, I don't necessarily have the funds to be able to go out and buy, every single volume or issue as they are. So, spending, I forget what the price is, whatever it is for the year, and then just being able to access that much, it's a little overwhelming, but for me, it was, kind of the perfect way to just jump into it before really committing and having a room.
Yeah, Dave's Dungeon.
Dave's Dungeon.
So for me, looking at it, it's interesting because I've seen throughout the years they've done anything from restarts, just flat out restarting the characters, or stuff like the Ultimate Universe where they basically it was okay, we've gotten so far along that people are intimidated to look at this material because there's so much. Why don't we reboot it again so that new readers can start at the beginning and kind of get to know who these characters are. And they've tried various different ways of going about it. I guess from my perspective, I was always interested, like, what is it that as a new reader you're looking at and you're going like, wow, this looks intimidating?
Well, I mean, there's that's kind of the thing, right? Is there's so many different places to start that you could start, and I think at least for me that was where I felt really intimidated by it. Was like I didn't know which one to pick because there are there are so many, and there's so many different opinions on do you start with Claremont or do you start with Bendis or whatever, right? So like it's definitely, from my perspective, it was just trying to find the right point for me to jump in versus what other people might kind of run with or all that, right? Like it's that's
No, it's very true. And I mean, there's been so many years. It's just like you said, there's been so many different eras, different, like a character like Dave was saying could start off in one completely one point, and by the time you read him 20 years later, it's a completely different character, and it's like I don't even know what the heck you're talking about.
But there's what I find is there's elements to the character that through the years, if you've read, have kind of concrete, this is what makes the character the character.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And I can understand where somebody jumping in would be like, well, why are they doing that, or why are they acting like that? And it's like, well, 600 issues ago, this is what happened. So it's from that perspective, I can get it, because if you're not, if you're not reading all of it along, you can quite easily get not so much confused, but overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's that thing too for me of like, I was really worried that when I jumped in, that I would be missing out on so many things from previous issues or previous runs or whatever, that I wouldn't understand what was happening. And so it was like a long time of that where I was just like, I don't know, what if I try reading this one, but I'm missing out on 20 years worth of history, and then I just feel completely lost, I get dejected. So
it's tough.
It was a lot of that.
even me, I know when I started reading comic books, again, it was one of those issues of money / where sometimes I just don't have access to a comic book store, so keeping up with certain comics was actually very hard. And it was one of those things, even myself as a comic book reader and fan, sometimes keeping up was an issue of I want to read this character, I want to read this writer, and then I haven't been to the comic book store in 2 years, I have no idea where the heck the story was, I don't remember it, or even the issue of they canceled the series and I had no idea, and now it's a whole another writer team, and it's a completely different story, and it's what's the point, right? And again, that's another good part about the app, is you can just pick and choose kind of what you're doing and go from there.
So exactly how, where did you choose to go in? I can reflect on myself, and I can say, as a kid, seeing the 70s Spider-Man cartoon was what just click. That's it. I'm Spider-Man. I read Spider-Man. That's what I do. And then slowly kind of built into the other stuff from there. But looking at it, how did you where did you decide, or how did you decide? Okay, this is a character I'm gonna try, or what was that process?
It was a process. So I did a lot of research, and I looked up a lot of lists online of good places to start with different characters. I did ask on TikTok for people to give me recommendations as if you were starting, or if you were recommending somebody starting, where would you go? And then I kind of looked at, because my knowledge of Marvel is mostly rooted in the MCU, or at least at that point it was, what's coming out and what am I excited for, or what characters am I interested in. And so at the time, it was a little bit before the Miss Marvel show started up. And I like Captain Marvel as a character, so I found her interesting, but that was another one where I was like, okay, but this is a character that's pretty well established, and I'm worried that I'm not going to, I'm going to be missing something. But with Miss Marvel, I was like, but that's an origin story. So I'm going to start with Kamala Khan. And so that's what I did, so it was a bit of a combination of a character I had interest in, but was intimidated by, but also here's a show that's coming out that I'm kind of excited for, so I'll do that. So that one was my first choice. And then at the same time, I decided to go way back and jump into the Dark Phoenix saga with the X-Men, because that was another one that I remembered from the 90s X-Men show. And I loved it in that. I remember, I have really good memories of watching that as a kid and being like, my mind was just blown. So that was kind of where I decided to ultimately start.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I kind of spiraled from there.
Before we go too far away from where your origin was, what was your favorite manga when you were
Oh
reading?
gosh. Okay. So
Dave, cover your ears. No.
I'll just nod off for a second.
Yeah, sorry, I'm really curious.
I mean, there was a lot. My brother and I were really, really into Yu Yu Hakusho.
Oh yeah.
That was like, my brother and I used to fight all the time as kids, and for some reason that one, like that manga and that anime were like a bonding moment we had.
Oh, nice.
And we still like text each other. Like there's a Netflix live action coming
yeah.
out, and like we send each other stuff about it all the time.
Yeah.
So that one, and I was also really into Cardcaptor Sakura back in the day.
Yeah, heck yeah.
I still have all the collector's edition mangas in my library at home.
I was always more anime than manga, but I always try to get my nieces into Cardcaptor Sakura because it's such a good
it's so good
intro to anime manga.
Yeah, I remember dropping most of my paychecks when I was working at McDonald's at
Nice.
16 at the bookstore, just buying as many as I could.
Dang, if I knew your manga, I would have had a couple recommendations there too. But
I mean, I can always come back.
Yeah, exactly. Right. When we have our comic books versus manga debate, you can come back for sure.
We'll
go for that.
I'm into it.
So yeah, moving away from that, so Dave can participate again. So like you've said, you kind of dabbled in new stuff versus old stuff, and that's a big theme in our show. Is like I'm a newer reader, he's an older reader. I guess I'm not even a new reader anymore. I'm like a middle-aged reader.
You're
but anyways,
intermediate.
yeah, I'm intermediate. Yeah, I'm middle-aged.
Older than you, so.
Yeah, but you're new to the comic book
yes.
reading, right? So like, how have you found reading like Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel versus reading like Dark Phoenix Saga back in the day?
I think for me, I kind of enjoy some of the more modern writing. Not because I don't appreciate or respect like the history of it or anything like that, but just for me personally, I find it's just easier for me to kind of just relate to a lot of it in a more tangible way, I guess. Like reading the Dark Phoenix Saga was interesting to kind of contrast it with the Miss Marvel stuff because like especially with the character of Jean Grey, I found she was written to not really have a lot of agency in her own story versus Kamala Khan, who very much is the one making her choices and doing the things she's doing. So I think just from that perspective, it was a lot easier for me to just get more into some of the newer stuff. But I am going to definitely be going back and reading more of the older stuff too, because I do like appreciate and respect the history there as well. So yeah, I think that's...
No, I feel very similar to you in that way. Like, I have tried to go back. Dave's always recommended, like, oh, you should read this run, you should read this run. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you can appreciate the old stuff for what it was, but you can definitely see some of the aging a little bit. But,
I think with the history of most of the characters, like, all of the, most, I'm not going to say all, most of the defining aspects of the characters happened way back when.
For sure.
So... you know, even I find myself challenged. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll read like X-Men comics under issue 100.
Oh, like the
just
60s.
The way, the way it's written, the way it's it's challenging sometimes because like just the way people talk, the words they use, and in all honesty, like Claremont, who was very well known for being very wordy, even back then, if you compare him to like Bendis now, it's like you can't hold a candle. Like, because I find Claremont back in the day, like, even though that was considered wordy, if you looked at other comics, you could understand why, because they said, like, 3 words.
Sure.
Per bubble kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he was wordy, and now I find, like, I look at Bendis, and I go, oh my god, like, this entire comic was just, like, one huge dialogue, which is not bad. He's a great writer, but it's just, it's interesting to see, going back and seeing that sometimes it is a struggle to go, like, oh, it's a good story. It's just the writing's sometimes a little suspect.
Yeah, I find it's like my issue with it is mainly the execution whenever I read old comics, because I feel like, and maybe like you're saying about Claremont versus Bendis, is that Claremont, when the way he's wordy, is like he has to explain everything the character's doing as opposed to everything the character's thinking or saying, whereas Bendis is everything the character's thinking and saying. So like, for example, you'll have a scene where it's like, if Claremont's writing, it'd be like, oh, Nightcrawler, he decides to bounce off the wall and do a triple backflip, whereas Bendis will go like, hey, what's up, nerds, it's me, Spider-Man, and like whip through the scene. And that's like different.
It's a little more shown.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like it's, and then you rely more on the artwork, which I found very interesting. But anyways, that's a whole other debate there. So what have you been receiving so far? Like you said, you're on TikTok asking for people to recommend. What have you been receiving? What have you been enjoying?
I've gotten lots of different types of recommendations, which I really appreciate from the people on TikTok who have given them. I think for me, I really enjoy. I enjoy more than I was expecting to. A lot of the more street level heroes. Like I've been reading some Daredevil, and I know you're gonna laugh at me, but I've actually really been enjoying Hawkeye as well. But I think I really like the sort of, I don't want to say like smaller stakes, because that's not necessarily true, but I find that those kind of stories are really interesting to me because you can focus on one story and one character and get really in depth with it, versus some of the bigger like universe ending events. And they're also a lot more accessible as a new reader too, because you're not necessarily needing to read like 20 different storylines from a bunch of different comics to converge into like a big event. So I've really been enjoying that kind of stuff. So I like the sort of more self-contained stories for now.
Yeah. Which I think is fair. I mean, if you think about it, it's like the reason why a lot of people like characters and whatnot is you get to know like them on a personal level. You get to know like what are their hopes and dreams, and then what's their family life like or friend life like. Whereas when you're in the event, which is epic and awesome, but you don't get that type of connection. It's all like there's so many moving parts, and you got to make sure everybody's like, a lot of the times you don't even talk about their personal lives in events, and you completely forget about it, and it's only about like Civil War or Secret Invasion, you know, that type of stuff.
Well, and you'll see with some of the recommendations that I've put forward, it's like if you go back and look at some of the older stuff, like they didn't have like a writer come in and they go, okay, tell us a story, and you have 6 issues to do it. They were very self-contained within one issue, maybe 2, but for the most part it was you know, villain shows up. You know, villain beats up good guy. You get to the second issue, good guy turns it around, wins the day, and that's maybe you got 2 issues where that story was being told. Whereas now it's like 10, 12 issues. I mean, you've got entire runs like Bendis's run on Daredevil is a whole thing itself, and that's well over 100 comics. Right. So it's you know, even back then, it's like now you see a lot more leeway with writers to be able to know, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell a story over 12 issues.
Yeah. A really good example of that immediately popped in my head was Days of Future Past by the X-Men. It cracked me up so much. So Days of Future Past is a really famous storyline. Like, I'd never read it, but I heard about it.
I saw the movie.
Yeah, exactly, right?
You've never read
I have now.
The 2 issues?
Yeah. You're spoiling it. Like, my favorite part about Days of Future Past is like it was a super famous X-Men storyline, blew a lot of people's minds, and like you said, they made a whole movie about it, and you watch the movie, it's like, this is epic, this is insane. You go to read the comic, it's literally like 2 issues.
And that's it.
And it was the quickest thing, and you're like, what happened? Like, it was so random. It was just like, this is the storyline.
So like, when you had story arcs, like there weren't, like if you go into the 80s, like there were certainly some story arcs, but if you went into any individual comic, there wasn't a lot of story arcs that were like, oh, this is 6 issues, or this is 4 issues, or this is 12 issues. It was because they were just so self-contained as one comic. It's, I pick up the comic and you better be able to tell me a story. And I think that's where some of the writing gets very crappy, to be blunt, because they have to resolve this by the end of this comic.
Well, and I think, like, I noticed that when I was reading the Dark Phoenix stuff, that you can tell very much that this is, like, a weekly release, that they're just trying to, like, you know, I'm blabbering now, you're going to have to edit this out. But, like, you're trying to, like, get it finished in a few issues so that you can start something new, because you're trying to keep people's interest in continuing it in the long run versus necessarily, like, building characters or stories the same way that you do now, where you can have, like you're saying, like, you know, 12 or 20 or whatever it is issues in a run, and you can collect them in a few volumes that people can read and really dig into. So
yeah, and I find it interesting you'd mentioned like that street level, like individual character kind of thing. Like that's where I started with, like, you know, your Spider-Man and your Daredevil and stuff, because I like the surrounding cast, and it was easier to relate to that in the sense of like, oh, Spider-Man has friends, and he has family, and he has, you know, there's okay, I can relate to that. Whereas like the team ones, I always found the team ones were just like a gateway drug to more characters. Because it was like, I like Wolverine, I'm going to read X-Men. Oh, wait a minute, what? There's Nightcrawler and Colossus, and there's like all these other characters.
Don't get me started on Nightcrawler.
Yeah, but they don't spend, they can't spend enough time with those characters to really
flesh them out.
Yeah, flesh them out.
Yeah. So what is your favorite character right now in Marvel?
Like Marvel Comics or like Marvel generally?
Give me both. Things. I'm curious. Give me both. So if you got 2 separate ones. Anybody
who has come here from my TikTok, or who will go to my TikTok after hearing this, I'm a Bucky Barnes girl.
Oh.
I am. So TikTok is a weird place sometimes.
Sometimes?
All the time. So I got onto TikTok originally to talk about being a new Marvel Comics reader, and I still do that. However, I started doing these silly, like, ranking videos where you use, like, the which character you filter, but instead of finding out which character you are, I rank them in order of 1 to 5 on how much I would want to go on a date with them. But the caveat of it is that the number 1 spot is always there for Bucky Barnes.
Hey, there you go.
And I have not gotten him yet. I've been doing this since like late August. I think I have like 45 some odd episodes of me doing this, and I haven't gotten him yet. But Odin and Ego, every time.
What?
I know, they just pop up. It's horrible.
Why are they an option?
They are, and it's horrible. So I am a Bucky Barnes girl. Through and through.
So obviously because of Sebastian Stan and the MCU more, right?
Yes.
But sorry, I meant like, was it comics or was it the movie side?
No, it was more the movies. And Sebastian Stan specifically, so I remember him being on like Gossip Girl and being absolutely in love with Carter Bazin. I was like, this little jerk could destroy my life and I would thank him for it. And so I've been in it ever since. And so like when he got cast in Captain America, I was immediately excited. Like I was like, I don't care who this Chris Evans guy is. I want to see this guy. And I had no idea any of like the history of Bucky Barnes as a character or anything like that. And so
this is a really unique opportunity. Did you know then about Winter Soldier before?
Absolutely not.
So what was your reaction when the reveal happened?
Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go ahead.
I shit myself.
That's hilarious.
I had no idea. And I honestly, like, when Winter Soldier, the movie came out, I wasn't paying that much attention to the MCU. Like, I'd seen the movies and, like, they were fun, but I wasn't quite as in it as I am now. And so when I watched Winter Soldier for the first time, I lost my damn mind.
That's
I was
amazing.
like, wait, he's the bad guy?
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was something.
And you've read the Winter Soldier
I have now.
The comics? Okay.
Yeah, I read
he's
it.
so much worse.
Yeah, he's
in
not
those
nice.
than he was in the movies.
Yeah,
100%.
so that was one of the after I finished like the Miss Marvel run and everything, that was one of the next ones that I read, which ironically enough, I used one of those dumb filters to decide which character I was going to read next, and I think Sharon Carter was the one that popped up, so I was like, alright, I'm reading Winter Soldier.
There you go. Close enough.
Yeah, so I have read some of that now.
That's
A
awesome.
good place to start. Ed Brubaker's a great run on Captain America. Like that's a great one for anybody.
It was excellent.
Hey, I want to read a Captain America thing.
So now that you've transitioned from like, you like the you watch the MCU, now you're more delved into there and you're reading the comics. Do you find when you're watching new MCU movies like, I get that reference yet? Or
Absolutely.
what do you, okay.
Yeah, my husband is sick of me doing it. Like, he will not watch She-Hulk with me because he knows I'm going to do
That's
that.
so funny. Yeah, when
It's kind of like how my wife's learned not to ask me what I thought of the
Yeah.
movie when I walk out. Or she'll ask me like, from an entertainment standpoint, did you enjoy the movie? Because she does it. Yeah, she's got to be very, very careful.
Well, that's another funny part that we've talked about before was, there's so many things that I knew that back in the day for Dave was mind-blowing for him. Because he's like, Green Goblin's Norman Osborn or, all this stuff. But for me, it was always like, I grew up knowing that. Like you said, it's either the TV shows or whatever. Yeah. It was just always known that was the reality of it. So it's now interesting to see that there's another generation of comic book fans that are now getting their mind blows in the movies. And then meanwhile, Dave and I are like, we knew the whole time, man.
Yeah. What are you excited about? That's been a thing for 20 years.
Yeah, that's funny.
So now that you fell for Sebastian Stan.
Hard.
He suckered you into watching The Winter Soldier.
Well, it wasn't just him, but yes.
So you watched The Winter Soldier, then you're like, hey, I'm curious, I'm going to read the comics. So if you separated the two, which one did you like better? The representation in the MCU,
right?
Sebastian Stan aside.
Yeah, I know. We're going purely on personality, not looks. No, that's fair.
Or the character that they write in the comics.
I think it's hard to compare because they don't feel the same to me. So it's not a straight across comparison. It's the way that they're exploring him in the MCU versus the stuff. And I mean, my knowledge in the comics is limited because I haven't read like all of it or anything like that, obviously. But the way that they kind of separate, like the way that you're sort of exploring these characters feels very different. And so like the MCU feels much more like a consistent story to me just because I've seen it now from First Avenger up through Falcon and Winter Soldier and then into when he's in Thunderbolts or whatever.
Yeah.
So to me, I can see it and look at it as like, here's how we started, here's what happened, etc., etc. With the comics, I've read the Ed Brubaker, and then I read the 5-issue, like kind of standalone thing where he was kind of I forget who wrote that one, but it was where he's helping like the young Hydra brainwash kid or whatever.
Yeah.
So I can't compare them the same way.
So I've always wanted to ask an MCU fan who got into comics books this: were you disappointed in that the character wasn't the exact same in the MCU when you read it in the comics?
I don't think disappointed is the right word, because I've been a bookworm my whole life. So I've lived my entire life watching movie adaptations that have been like quote unquote disappointing. So I'm pretty good at separating the two things and looking at them as being different, which is why I like to try and compare Sebastian Stan Winter Soldier to like comic book Winter Soldier. Is not really something I'm going to do because I don't view them as being like the same. So I wouldn't say disappointed. It's just I guess some of it I just wasn't expecting.
Okay.
And there's some things about it that I like that I think that I would love to see them actually incorporate into the MCU. Mostly the fact that Bucky Barnes has a cat.
Yeah, bring it in.
Alpine, I know, I want Alpine, but apparently Sebastian Stan has a cat allergy, so they can't do it.
They could CG it.
I think they should just make him take some Benadryl so that I can see him snuggle with this cute little fluffy
Could you
cat.
imagine Sebastian Stan, a cat, and Yelena Bolova all in the same room together?
I will die of cat lady bisexuality if that happens.
That would be amazing.
I would lose my mind.
The second they announced Yelena Bolova, I mean, if she's in any of the MCU stuff, immediately I'm there. Day
Florence
one.
Pugh is a goddess walking among us.
100%. She's amazing. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions you got about recommendations and stuff?
No, it just, I mean, have you ever found yourself kind of, you get a recommendation or you pick a character and you're like, hey, like Winter Soldier, right? You go into the Winter Soldier, obviously that's in Captain America. Have you found anywhere you've got into it and then discovered like another character through that?
100%.
And gone like, oh, wait a minute, who's this? And
Yeah,
then gone off in that direction.
So I read a little bit of, what was it? Oh, it was a Daredevil run. I'm so bad at remembering who wrote what.
So am I.
But it was one of the ones where Punisher was like kind of flitting around or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never really been that interested in Punisher as a character before, so I was like, oh, okay, well this guy's kind of around, whatever, he's fine. But then I forget exactly what the interaction was, but like he said or did something where I was like, okay, well that's actually more interesting than I expected out of Punisher, because like, I don't know anything about him much, right? Other than like, okay, his family was all killed and now he murders people, like.
Yeah.
Which is
which is
basically
I respect it. It's just that was kind of all I really knew about Punisher.
Yeah.
So after that, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna read a Punisher run. So I read it was this one I do remember. It was the 2014 Nathan Edmondson run.
Okay.
And I really liked it. I was like, I like Frank Castle. He's a really interesting, like he's not just this one-dimensional,
No.
I'm going to kill the bad people, which is kind of more where my mind, which like, it's a bit of it's not a fair statement to make that I'm like, oh, that's just what he's like all the time. But I decided to branch out a little bit and try it. And I was like, this is really, really actually interesting and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point of saying, like, I thought that's all Punisher was. Because there's a lot of situations where they use Punisher as just that guy of, like, Spider-Man, why don't you fucking kill people, man? Like, and they use him a lot in that way. They even kind of use it in that Daredevil one. I think I know what one you're talking about. But it is interesting when they actually delve into his character. And it's like, oh, no, he has a lot of nuance and whatnot for him.
Well, I mean, he cares about people, right?
Yeah.
Like the Edmondson run that I read, like, he's got, like, these friends at this diner he hangs out with. Like, we all have friends at a diner we hang out with.
Yeah.
Like, so it's just, it just feels a lot more, like, relatable than I was expecting.
Well, I think that was certainly for me, from a Marvel comic standpoint, that was always the point of what made the comics interesting was the fact that, yes, you could say, like, oh, Spider-Man, he puts on his tights, he shoots webs, he does his thing. But what makes Spider-Man is his surrounding cast, right? It's not the fact that he does what he does. It's if you've read the comic long enough, it's a lot about the people that are around him and the interactions that he has with them and how that shapes his character. It's not going out and fighting Rhino or doing this or doing that. It's the characters and I think a lot of the comics like that, who would think, oh, Punisher, like he uses guns and he runs around shooting people that are jaywalking or whatever.
Hey, it's like a serious problem, man.
He actually, just to say, he actually did that. He actually shot a guy that jaywalked. But once you kind of get behind that and start to see, there's a lot more to it than just I put on my tights and I run around and I do stuff.
Yeah.
Feel free not to answer this in case you don't want to insult somebody who did this on TikTok for you. Has there been something you absolutely hated that somebody recommended?
Nothing that anyone's recommended. I have read a few things that I don't want to use the word hate because like I don't really want to like I don't want to like shit on anything that people enjoy because that's not really what I'm about.
Yuck, they're yum. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's definitely been stuff that I've read that I that just didn't do it for me in the way that I was kind of hoping. So like I did read a She-Hulk run that I just didn't.
Was it Dan Slott?
I don't think
Okay.
so. I can look it up.
Are you trying to aggravate?
No, it would be really
fine.
funny if it was Dan Slott's run, and then you can be like you're in the clear, you know.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Which is supposed to be a really good run, but anyways, yeah.
No, I don't actually think I've read any Dan
While
Slott
she's
yet,
looking,
so.
have you like can you think of a comic that you've absolutely hated that you're just like this is nobody should read this trash?
Oh boy. I would have to say there's been I would not say like there's like a character like don't ever read the Fantastic Four. It's always been like single issues of comics or maybe a run that was just like for instance when we read No Way Home or
Avengers.
The Avengers like that was one I was like I read it and then I was like I will never recommend this to anybody because it just didn't
click.
It didn't click. So there's certainly been I would say storylines or individual comics that I've read and I've gone like I wish this didn't exist because it just wasn't good.
Yeah.
But not an entire character or anything like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, there's been some runs. It's like why were you selected for this? Type of thing.
It was the Charles. I'm going to say this wrong. Charles Soleil.
Okay. Yeah.
2014 She-Hulk
Never
run.
even heard of that.
It just didn't. I was real. I think maybe it was part just like. It just didn't do it for me, and like maybe my expectations were just different than what I got, which, that's on me, and that's fine.
No,
but
it's
it
possible.
And it doesn't mean that I don't want to read and enjoy more She-Hulk. That one just didn't do it.
No, there's a good chance that we're gonna recommend stuff that we enjoy that it just doesn't click for
Pretty
you,
much
right?
anything I recommend is not going to be enjoyed. It's in the 80s.
That's not true. I think a lot of things from the 80s. I'm from the 80s.
I've enjoyed some things you've recommended, Dave. It's on the podcast now. Whatever, you can replay that clip for
It's
you.
on the internet forever now.
Yeah. So let's go into our second part, which is kind of like what Dave and I, the process of recommending that we kind of go through. Like, what do you consider and whatnot? And you can chime in with it, like, especially I have a couple questions for you as we go into these details, right? It's like, so Dave, when somebody comes to you and is like, hey, I'm getting into comic books, what is your thought process? How do you recommend comics to those people?
Well, I mean, the easiest thing is usually start with like what interests do they have? Like, is it do they like the team books with the big dynamics like the Avengers, that kind of thing, or is there a specific character that they like that they want to follow? Usually that's the easiest way to recommend anything, because if you take a look at whether it's Avengers or Captain America or Spider-Man or X-Men or whatever it is, there's a good run in there somewhere that you can recommend to somebody and get them really to understand, because the last thing you want is them to grab or pick up something that's like, oh, this was just a really filler story for 4 issues that was really bad, I don't ever want to go back to that. So I usually start there. The team books I find are nice because, or event books are nice because they usually introduce you to more than one character at a time. So you can actually start to kind of feel like, oh, okay, I didn't know much about Luke Cage, and I didn't know, so you can start to kind of see what those characters are about. But that at the same time can get, I feel, a little confusing, because then it's not confusing but overwhelming, because then it's like, well, do I need to know who all these people are and what they're doing? But it's tough. Like you said, now I would probably recommend stuff that's more recent.
Yeah.
Just because, to your point, it's just a lot more relatable, right? Like, they have cell phones. Whereas, like, you jump into a comic in the 80s or the 90s, they don't have cell phones.
Yeah, they have that landline.
They're not
Or just the way that they write those relationships, right? It's a little bit more, like,
Yeah, it's
concrete.
very, it's just not, it's not present. That's what it is not. I would say if somebody like got into something and was like, hey, I really like this run in Spider-Man, and I would say, okay, if you want a character defining moment, read this.
Yeah.
Right? Like, read the 2-issue fight between him and Green Goblin where Gwen Stacy dies.
Gwen Stacy, yeah.
Because that, although maybe not greatly written, is a pivotal moment in that character's move forward. But it would definitely be something recent because it's just a lot easier to.
So have you ever run into the problem of somebody going like, "Hey, I'm interested in this character. I'm interested in comics," and then it's like, we even mentioned this earlier in the podcast. Is like, where do you start? Like, do you tend to find like a number one and go like, "Hey, this is a good Marvel created this starting point. It is a good starting point," or do you go like, "Hey, sometimes you just gotta Wikipedia a couple things and go nuts." You know?
Yeah, I would say like it's more important. I think it's more important that you get that you get a good story. Then you do go like, okay, read issue number 1 and then number 2 and then and not volume 3. You got to read volume 1. Like it's more important to find a story because if you read the story and the story's good, you're gonna get more into that character and then you're gonna start to Wikipedia stuff and look stuff up and okay, maybe read the next series or whatever, and you're gonna start to pick it up because I don't think there's any perfect place to say, okay, start at this issue and you will never ever have to worry about
it's impossible.
And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind too, like to realize that like you're never going to find a perfect place. Like you can go all the way back and start with the very first, was it Fantastic Four or whatever the very first Marvel comic is. But that still isn't necessarily going to be the perfect place for somebody to start because that's not necessarily what's going to relate to them. So you really do have to think about what kind of stuff is going to draw a person in and get them wanting more versus just getting into it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Is like, have you had a moment where somebody recommended something? You're like, wait, give me. I guess we kind of mentioned this earlier. It's like, have you ever been daunted by how much backstory you've had to read, or are you able to kind of pick it up as you go along?
Like some have been harder than others for sure. Like some of it. There's definitely been moments where I've been reading like, I wish I had more context to what this was about. I think I was reading the Ta-Nehisi Coates Black Panther run, which I very much enjoyed, and I thought the writing and everything was excellent, but it was kind of a thing where I started it, and then I felt like I had missed out on a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Just because it felt like very much in the middle of an already happening story. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely something I think about every time I do pick up a new character or a new story that I'm getting into. But I'm also like, I do have enough sort of prior knowledge going into it now at this point where there's a lot of things like that where it's like, okay, I don't know what exactly that's about, but I can kind of piece it together.
Yeah.
But it really does depend on like who's writing it and what it is that I feel like is. That I'm missing out on personally, so
yeah,
and I think like the way they write things now versus the way they wrote, like when they killed the Green Goblin, he stayed dead for decades,
right? Yeah.
Like he was just like, no, we're not bringing him back. Now they cycle through like you can read like a Fantastic Four comic, depending on which volume it is. At some point in that volume, Doctor Doom's going to show up, and he's going to be a major player in whatever they're doing. Right, and I think it's helpful for new readers getting in because then you read it and it's like it's not like you have to go like, oh, okay, I've never heard of this character that they just pulled out of the out of the drawer from 50 years ago that I know nothing about. It's like, no, this character's always in the comics, so it's easier to pick up from that standpoint.
Have like a baseline.
Yeah, I think that is one of the nice things about modern times with Marvel and other comic books is there's so much other material out there than just the comic books that somebody's probably heard of a character outside of the comic books. Like a big task I had recently was a lot of my nephews and nieces wanted to get into Marvel. Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like, I saw Spider-Man, he looks super cool on Fortnite, type of thing. Yeah, exactly. Or like Venom or something like that. Yeah. But then the problem is that their moms will just then be like, okay, they want to read Venom, where should I start with Venom? I'm like, how old are they again? Wait, well, just give me a second.
Start with Secret Wars.
Yeah, well, it's one of those issues of like, the age rating sometimes a little bit flub, and they do. Marvel especially usually does it really good about like having some storylines that are made for kids, which is nice. But it's one of those things where it's like my main recommendation, because I've only ever read like the PG-13 stuff, is all PG-13, and I don't think they want them to read that, Venom eating brains and stuff like that.
Now, would Strange Academy be one that you would
see? That would be a good recommend, which we'll get into later. Spoilers, but no, like I said, there are comic books out there, but I definitely find that comic books do lean more towards PG-13. So like when you have kids who are like under 10 and they're like, oh, I saw Tom Holland on TV, show me some Spider-Man. It's like, well, are you gonna get the nuance of Peter Parker not being able to afford rent? you know,
Yeah.
just a major plot point
Yeah.
for the last 50 years, you know, type of thing. So
Constantly letting all his friends down.
yeah, you know, it's a
Either can't hold a job
or a girlfriend, you know.
or a girlfriend or, you know,
So
all
I
this
do
stuff.
find that's a little bit tough sometimes is the age rating. But another thing I like to do a lot is yeah, just like what character looks cool to you, you know,
Yeah.
and like I said, it's a big, like that's how actually I got into comics was. There's a video game called Marvel Ultimate Alliance.
Oh yeah.
Great game. I love it so much. I'm probably just nostalgia glasses at that point. But
It was
what?
the greatest game
Isn't
ever.
like the
all
whole
the time.
podcast like something of a nostalgia?
That's true.
classes
Yeah,
situation?
Dang, she knows too much.
I've been listening since day one.
Yeah, exactly, right? So one of my favorite things about that game was how many characters. This is pre-MCU, so they're like, you can have any character in there, go nuts, because they weren't just pushing the main people.
Yeah.
And so like my buddy and I were playing, and we just swap out characters. And so he discovered Deadpool, and then I discovered Ghost Rider. I'm like, this
Oh,
character is
yeah.
amazing. He's from hell. His head's on fire, and then you can grab people with his chains and whip them. So then that immediately led me into like nothing to do with the comics, but now I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna go read the comics because this
Right.
character's so cool. I think that's a nice thing. Is like, hey, random person on the street, who have you seen that looks cool, and then I'll find you a run that amplifies that feeling.
And
Right?
it's funny because I mean I remember when I was a young comic book reader, you know, just collecting the stuff that I read. It was like Captain America. That guy looks dumb.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Thor,
Fights with a
he
shield.
fights
Yeah.
with a hammer.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
It was just
Don't
like
make fun of the hammers.
but it was just like it for whatever reason at that age it just didn't appeal. And then you know I really wish that earlier on I would have picked up some of that stuff because there were some fantastic runs going on at that time when I was first getting into comics for those characters that were just epic.
Yeah.
Right.
But I you know I just purely on like I don't like the way he looks. He's got rings on the side of his
Yeah.
head. You know, it was like you know, but certainly for a like to get in, I would say you know select that. But I would also say like give it a chance. I mean now there's so many short runs like 4 issues, 6 issues kind of thing. You know, or small graphic novels where you can just pick up real quick and go like I'm not really sure. Like everybody like there's a lot of Thor movies out there. I'll just pick this up and I'll read it. That you can you know get into a character that maybe might surprise you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I was surprised how much I enjoyed Thor because I read the Gore the God Butcher stuff before Love and Thunder came out, and
Yeah.
so I kind of like I liked Thor in the movies, but I was like I don't know how this is going to translate into a comic book, and I read that and I was like this is excellent.
yeah.
Thor is
Way better.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so much different.
So
Yeah.
much different.
Yeah. Another thing I was going to ask you about was, do you recommend based on genre at all? Like, do you ever go to a person like, are you a horror person? Are you comedy? Are you, you know?
Yeah, if somebody comes to me and they're like, I really want like, oh, everybody's talking about Punisher, and it's like, okay, well, do you like people getting shot in the face? Like,
Yeah.
do you like graphic, violent kind of? You know, if you're not into that, you're not going to like the Punisher. Doesn't matter how much your friend is telling you like this is an amazing
Yeah.
thing.
Or how
So I
cool you
mean,
think John Bernthal is.
yeah, there has to be because there are very much like how people compare the you know DCU versus the MCU, and like DCU is so dark and this is so dark. There are certain characters that are light that have some darker moments here and there, and then there's certain characters that spend a lot of their time very dark and have lighter moments now and again. So I think that does play into it a lot as well. Like I don't think necessarily somebody that likes Spider-Man will necessarily like Daredevil because Daredevil's a little edgier, a little darker, not as dark as the Punisher.
Yeah.
But very different.
Yeah, on the
It's
spectrum.
tone. The tone
Yeah.
is different,
The
yeah.
tone is different. So it's you know I think it does play a factor into you know if somebody says, oh, do you think I like this? It's well.
Yeah, what do you like?
Do you like, do you like slapstick? Okay, you'll
Yeah.
probably like
Like
Deadpool,
Deadpool, yeah.
Yeah.
or you'll like Spider-Man. If you're looking for slapstick, I'm not going to recommend you Punisher or Daredevil. 'Cause that's not what it is.
Could you imagine like Punisher walking around accidentally step on a rake, you know?
I'd read that though.
It'd be funny.
That'd be like a fun multiverse little like
Yeah.
side story thing.
Very, very reminiscent of like X-Force by Rick Remender and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Whoa.
Have you found a genre you're enjoying more? Like,
I like a lot of different genres. Like I'm not like committed to one specific type. Like I like fantasy, I like sci-fi, I like horror, I like gritty realism. So like I don't have like a genre that I gravitate to more so. I just like if it's a cool story and a compelling character, I'm not worried about genre
Perfect.
as much for me.
yeah, no, good to hear. I mean, that's a great segue into what are our recommendations, Dave, for
Oh.
Melanie and for new readers in general. What was your thought process going into? Did you just pick your favorite
I was
ones?
like,
or-
I'm gonna go super old that Greg might not even recognize some of these.
Yeah.
No, I looked at a couple things. Number one, I said I'll go with some of the older stuff because that's I'm familiar with
It's kind
it.
of your shtick.
Because you're old. Yeah.
Yes. So I went. That was criteria 1. Criteria 2 was kind of like looking at. Say if it was a series, which we'll see with some of these, if they've redone that again, okay, let's take a look at the original way they did this, so that you could actually get an idea of Inferno in Dawn of X, significantly different,
Amazingly
than the
different.
original Inferno.
I don't even know why they use the name.
Yeah,
It's
very
just-
much like the movies when they say Civil War and you think Captain America, and you're watching that like for me, knowing the Civil War comics,
Right.
I laughed out loud when I saw 5 characters running towards 5 characters. So
On
in
an
Civil,
airplane hangar,
but because in Civil War it was like all of them fighting,
It
like
was
it was
insane.
massive. So like it's a lot of that to understand. Like, okay, this is the actual context of what
Right.
this was,
Yeah.
and what they did over here is so much different.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thought process was, like we said, I did more of the newer stuff. I was trying to aim more towards stuff that you could jump in if you don't have a lot of backstory. Some of them you kind of need a couple things backstory, but most of them are kind of for brand new people. I also did mine separated based on genre, because I was just like, maybe like you're more into more stuff, but or you're into a lot of stuff.
But it's
if
always
our
good to like.
yeah, and
have that
if there's
distinction.
listeners out there who only like one certain
of
genre,
course.
here's a good read too. I also did branch out a little bit from Marvel, so I know it's not on the app, but if you ever feel like branching out, here's a couple of recommendations to,
Alright. No, I'm
to
always
branch
down.
out. So
Yeah.
how many do you have, Dave? We didn't
I have
talk
so
about
many.
this.
We
That's
could
so
go
many.
for a whole other podcast.
How many got written down?
Written down, I'm probably close to 10.
Holy crap! I only have 5. I didn't think I just assumed 5, so my bad. We should have honestly.
I
We should
went
talk about this
5,
before.
and then I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm well past 5.
Are you gonna give big descriptions of? We should have talked about this beforehand. Are you gonna give big descriptions
I
of
can
each?
give
or-
a brief description,
Okay.
but I wanted to leave it, because I would explain it away.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
for the most part, it's like I did look at things like who the artist was,
Yeah.
who the writer is, because one of them I think is very, I think would be very shocking for a lot of people that know a particular writer that does a lot of good stuff in DC. That he actually wrote something in
Oh, really?
the Marvel universe that not a lot of people are
Who?
aware of. Jeff Johns,
Oh, what did he do in Marvel?
Avengers.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't even know that. That's amazing. I
There's your next episode.
yeah, I like Jeff Johns
It was
too.
actually, this series is actually which is semi-recent, is actually the one that actually got me into collecting Avengers.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because of the art and the writer.
Yeah, I only did 5. I broke it down in a genre, and I'll give a little bit thought process behind that. And yeah, feel free to throw in some questions that you have. I'll have some questions for Dave too, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. That'll be nice. But let's listen.
That's a guarantee.
That's a guarantee. But yeah, let's start off with yours, Dave, because you have more than me. So let's go with that.
I would start with as far as old, because I know that there's a series coming out regarding it, so you would probably get this recommended to you at some point, anyways. Iron Man: The Armor Wars.
Oh yeah.
By Bob Layton, who's I have to say one of my favorite old Iron Man artists. But it was basically just a section of comics that would have been back in the 80s, like
Okay.
late 80s.
Like about my age.
Yeah. So it's basically the premise is exactly that. It's like, what if Tony Stark's tech escaped,
Right.
and people started using it, and how he reacts to handling that. And again, wasn't a series. It was just an arc, a story arc in the comic, and I think it really defined number one, who he is.
Right.
Because he doesn't want his stuff to become weapons, obviously. But number two, there's a very defining moment between him and Steve Rogers
Okay. Cool.
that kind of carries over, in my opinion, why their relationship is what it is.
Oh, that's awesome too. I haven't actually read any Iron Man comics yet. He's shown up in a few things I've read, but I haven't read Iron Man yet. So.
Yeah. So that's my first recommendation.
I don't think I've actually ever read really any Iron Man, other than maybe Ultimate Iron Man once in a while. So yeah,
Oh, wow.
no, very cool. I'll go next because this one we can get out of the way pretty quick. I was going to recommend Thor: God of Thunder.
Yeah.
The Gore the God
Been there,
Butcher.
done that, Greg.
Yeah, Jason Aaron. Anyway, we've talked about it a couple times on the podcast too. It's a great run. Go check it out. Way
It's
better,
excellent, yeah.
way better than the movie. I hate that movie.
Oh, I liked the movie.
Well, that's a whole nother podcast. So that was my action genre recommend because I find a lot of that is mainly just action. Like there is some storyline about like how sad it is.
It's very story heavy, I thought, and then kind of progressed into more of an action.
More of an action thing. My definitely leans more towards action. I mean, all of them have some sort of action in it. So
it's a good one, though.
Yeah, but my substitute, since you've already read that, is Planet Hulk by
that one is definitely on my list.
Greg Pak and Carlo Pagulayan. One of my favorites, like one of my top 5 of all time story runs. I love that, and that's even even after reading Immortal Hulk and like how amazing that was, I still think Planet Hulk is up there fighting it. But it's so good. It's amazing. It has Hulk just being Hulk and going nuts on a whole planet full of people who can match him. So it's just really good.
I'm really excited to check that one out because that's another one kind of like Punisher, where Hulk for me was always just like, oh, okay,
smashy guy.
Yeah, it's just fine. Like that's great. We all have our rage we have to get out.
Yeah.
But I was always kind of just. Yeah, Hulk's fine, whatever. But then I think you guys were actually talking about that on one of your previous episodes. You were talking about Planet Hulk, and I was like, that actually sounds, or World War Hulk or something. And I was like, that sounds really cool. Actually.
Oh yeah, Planet Hulk's great.
Yeah, there's a bunch of good ones, and if you like the Pack, Pack's currently writing a lot of Maestro.
Oh really?
Stuff right now. So Maestro is like this evil, horrible version of the Hulk in the future, where he's just like given up on humanity and he's a total D-bag, and it's great.
It's good times.
I like it.
Dave, what's your next one?
This one was probably one of the more mind-blowing things that they did in the Marvel universe back when I was a youngin'. Was the Age of Apocalypse.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it blew my mind. It interrupted the entire comic series because it basically said, okay, this is where it gets cut off, and now all of a sudden we're producing a whole bunch of different comics like the Amazing X-Men and Gambit and the Externals, and instead of X Factor, it was Factor X, and it was all the characters that now live in this apocalyptic world where Apocalypse is essentially won and taken over, and they're the resistance to the extent, except you see a lot of characters switching sides, like where you'd have traditional good X-Men. The way they were brought up in this new world was no, they're actually on Apocalypse's side, and there's a bunch of comics that go around that, and it was just such a fantastic story overall, and a very defining. They keep retreading it all the time, and it's because it was just so good.
That good.
It was so good.
Who wrote it? I guess it was a lot of writers.
There were a lot of
right?
different writers that wrote that.
See that we were kind of saying this earlier about events. I consider that more of an event storyline, and I actually find it. I think it's great. I have read it. I just think it's hard to read in like a sense. There's so many comics that are involved with it. I think there's there is one that goes like progress through the entire storyline, which is pretty good. But it's definitely one of those bigger event ones in my opinion. So it's kind of it's interesting.
Yeah, but as far as like X-Men defining. And just like event, just world shattering. It was
Again, another one to compare to the movies. Man, that comic.
I never did watch that.
Okay, don't.
I'm not going to.
Good.
I love Oscar Isaac too much to do that to myself.
Do that to him.
Yeah. Do that to him.
How dare they use the same name?
Yeah. Good for him on bouncing back. I'm surprised they got him.
Moon Knight. I loved Moon Knight.
It was a good time. But go again, Dave. Go again, Dave, because I have less than you. Yeah.
Okay, I would say you have to go back and because there were just a lot of things that happened in this series that people aren't aware of that kind of shape characters so far into the future, is the original Secret Wars from 1984, 1985. It was drawn by one of my all-time favorite older artists, Mike Zeck. It was just like it was the first of its kind. There were that might be a bit of a stretch, but as far as Marvel's concerned, as far as Marvel was concerned, like there were no events. There was nothing like this. So when they came up with Secret Wars, it was everybody was like, "What? What is this?" And it's way different than any Secret Wars that you've seen since.
Right.
And it's the original one. You had a lot of things that happened in that comic that shape other characters going forward that will be very much like as you're reading through, you're going, oh, you're like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And it's the first one. Like, if you try to go back and try and find any other like event type comic for Marvel, you won't find
It's
it.
not there.
That is the first one.
I'll admit, when I went to go read it, it actually held up pretty well.
It held up all right.
For modern standards, right? There's some really cool things that happen in that book that they would have done in modern times too. And like the writing wasn't because it's very much more of a fight most of the time. There wasn't a lot of dialogue, so you don't have that 80s dialogue running the whole time. So it's actually a really good read. I agree with that recommendation. Yeah. For me, my next one, we kind of, again, Dave kind of spoiled this. I actually really like Strange Academy.
Okay.
So it's just started recently in 2020. Okay. It was written by Scotty Young and it was drawn by Humberto Ramos, which is hilarious because
awesome.
this is a more in joke for me and Dave. Humberto Ramos' art looks a lot like Scotty Young's art. So it's really funny when I looked at it, I'm like, isn't Scotty Young just doing the whole thing? It's like, no, there actually is a guy that just has very similar art doing it. But the reason I like this, especially as a recommend, is it's a really brand new cast of characters.
Okay.
Like they all have relationships to different areas of the Marvel universe. Like you have a couple people from Asgard, a couple people from planet Earth, you got a couple people from like just like all over the place, and just kind of it kind of reminiscent of old X-Men where they just get a bunch of
school kind of
exactly.
Okay.
Like so the whole premise is basically the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange, decides to create a school for young people, kind of like what mutants were doing, to teach them how to use magic. Strange Academy, Doctor Strange. Sorry, I should have started there. But basically, he gets a school together of all these kids, and you just have all these dynamics of kids being kids.
Yeah.
Oh, I kind of like this boy. Does he like me? You know, that type
Sounds
of
like
stuff.
a manga.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like it is very reminiscent of My Hero Academia and whatnot. So I think it's a great starting off point for that reason. You don't need a lot of history for it. It has action, it has comedy, it has. I mean, there are a couple moments where I'm like, why would that character do that? That's so stupid.
Sure.
But it's.
I have moments like that in my real life where I'm like, why did I do that? That was dumb.
Exactly. And I also think it's a really good recommend, like Dave said, for younger people too. So like I would definitely give this to one of my nieces and be like, hey, this is and nephews, and be like, this is a pretty good starting on point and whatnot. So.
I don't think I've heard of that one yet.
Yeah, it's pretty new. Like they've only actually had one like arc really.
Okay.
Like it's pretty new, but no, it's definitely a good read, and I love the art. Like it seems more kiddie, like almost manga-y, but then it still has some edge to it.
Yeah,
Right.
So
he's still one of my favorite Spider-Man artists. Like he's done Spider-Man more than a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah, great art. Great art.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So yeah, Dave, what's your next?
I was speaking about it earlier. Avengers. The story arc was called Red Zone.
Oh, okay. Never heard of it.
It was done in 2003, and it was Jeff Johns who wrote it, and it was Oliver Coppola.
Okay.
That did the art, and the art is amazing. The story is great, and it's what got me into like I remember I picked up an issue. I think it was down at like a corner store when corner stores still actually sold comics, and I just saw it there, and I was like, oh, it's killing time. And I opened it, and the art by Oliver is just like amazing, and I was like, this is awesome. It just made every Avenger look amazing.
Sometimes the art can really make or break something.
So I was like, I'm gonna snag this because it was like part one. I was like, I'm gonna take this one, and then I had to get the rest of the series, and then the next time they did another series. It was Lionheart, and I had to get that one because the art and the story was just great. But this was the first one that got me really into the Avengers because it was just like everything that you could ask for as far as the Avengers and the various characters, and it was great.
That's really cool. I've never heard of that. So I actually really like Jeff Johns. Everything I've read about him is what he likes to do. I find is really redefine characters, but still like amplify what makes them core characters. Like almost like he redid Aquaman and made Aquaman cool, and it was like, wow, that's good for you, buddy. That's amazing.
Aquaman.
Yeah, I know that's pretty impressive. Like Dave was saying, he's more of a DC guy, but I would definitely check that out. I'm gonna check that out. It's cool. Give us another one, Dave.
It would have to be. I was just because I love these like rehashed ones. Is reading Inferno. The old. So again, back in the day, they didn't have massive events all the time where they switch stuff up. This one was just like Inferno's happening. There's no Inferno miniseries. It's just happening really primarily in the X-Men comics, but it affected everybody. Like there was a huge effect in the Spider-Man universe because like all these devils and goblins and demons and stuff were running around New York, and it had a major effect on one of Spider-Man's main bad guys at the time. But the comic itself is like the introduction of Madeline Pryor as the Goblin Queen. You had Mr. Sinister, who's like by far my all-time favorite X-Men villain.
I remember him being real cool in the '90s show.
Yeah, and there's at that period you had just come out of the Fall of the Mutants, so it was thought that the X-Men characters were dead.
Oh.
But you had X Factor, which were the original X-Men, and they meet for the first time after everybody thinks they're dead. And with everything that's going on, they think, oh, this ain't real.
Yeah, like what?
So they get in it. And
That's awesome.
They get into a fight.
So
and the
cool.
art's done by Mark Silverstreet. It is just mwah, amazing.
Chef's
It's
kiss.
amazing.
I didn't know the X-Men fought each other. You should have told me that. I would have read it earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I've always heard of Inferno. I've never gotten around to reading it. It's just one of those ones that
That
just
sounds
missed
super
me.
cool.
Yeah.
I would say like certainly the X-Men comics are like that's really the story. You don't have to read all the other stuff. The other stuff was just like, hey, we're on the outside, and why is there a demon running down the street? And they're dealing with that. It was just mainly, I would say probably about 4 to 6 issues of the X-Men / X Factor that you really have to pay attention to. That's just and maybe even New Mutants as well, because it allowed a little bit to do with Darkchild or Magic.
Yeah. Gotta love Magic. She has some good moments.
Is Ilyana Rasputin?
Yeah.
Is that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yeah, exactly, right? Movie was terrible.
That's
she was
another
great.
one I didn't see the movie. I've just seen clips of it, but I love her and everything she does.
She was great.
So.
She was probably one of the best, if not the best.
They wrote her character terribly, but she was great.
She did the most.
Yeah, she was trying so hard to save that movie, and it was just such a shit show.
Yeah.
That's one of those movies, side tangent, you gotta just, like, if you're drunk or high or whatever, just watch and go, like, this is
Like watching
terrible.
Cats.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, you know it's a train wreck, you gotta watch
You
it.
just have to enjoy it for the mess that it is.
100%. So this will be my DC recommend for you.
Okay, all right.
So
Okay, let's go.
in my opinion, most of DC's best books and runs are actually alternate dimension side stories outside of the because the mainline DC universe makes no fucking sense. Sorry to tell you this. Like the only one I've actually enjoyed was New 52, but
They're restarting it again.
yeah, they are restarting,
Yeah.
and that's the other issue is
Nice.
every 2 years they restart it
They
because
just
they can't.
gotta,
They can't help themselves.
Well, if they make it such a mess, then they have to clean it up somehow,
Exactly, right?
So
Most of my favorites of all time are definitely in the 80s, but because I was tasked with doing a lot more modern stuff, I actually really enjoyed Batman White Knight 2017 by Sean Murphy. He actually wrote and did the art for it. It's really good in the sense of like, I feel like a new reader would enjoy it, but it pays so much homage to different eras of Batman. It has feelings of the animated series from the 90s, but it still has, it has callbacks to Batman Returns by Frank Miller or Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. Like it's a very one of those books where it just pays homage while still introducing something new. Like the basic concept of it is that it's Batman, alternate dimension a little bit, not too far off, but Joker turns good.
Oh.
They find a way to just shove pills down Joker's throat.
Just medicate the crazy out of
So
him.
then he goes good, but the thing is he's still Joker mind in the sense of he's a genius.
Oh,
So he basically goes to Batman and is like, you're doing everything wrong and I'm going to show you how it's done. And then it's just him tearing Batman apart and just going like, you're bad at this, you're bad at this. And but then like the way it ends is just a really nice succinct ending. I mean, it's still, it has sequels that branch off and continue the story, but it's just a really good book about like, again, paying homage for the old readers, but still just a new thing for new readers as well. So if you ever are in a comic book store and see some DC that you're tempted to dabble in, I highly recommend it. It's also, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I'm definitely interested in like trying out other stuff besides Marvel. It's just like the Marvel thing was just like the spot.
Oh, and their app is so
That's
good,
the
right?
one.
And their app is so easy to use. Like DC, I think theirs was like built into HBO Go or something like that. Like it was super weird.
Yeah.
But again, like the nice thing about DC is all the good stuff is just graphic novel, and you can just grab that.
Yeah,
you
like
got
I've
the
read
whole
the odd. Like I think I read like the Killing Joke.
Yep.
And like kind of some of the more like,
Iconic.
yeah, like things like that. But yeah, I haven't dabbled too much into the DC stuff.
Yeah, and then DC, so that also I'll mention is part of DC Black Label.
Okay.
And apparently, I haven't read all of it, but apparently a lot of Black Label stuff is really good. It's supposed to be like their more adult type stuff.
Okay, yeah.
And some of it's just kind of weird. It's all a bunch of nudity, and it's like, why is Batman naked here? But there's
Why isn't Batman naked?
fair enough. But then you had a lot of other storylines. They take more of adult stance towards it as opposed to like a PG-13 type of thing.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dave, what's your next?
I'll go with a DC one.
Okay.
And the only reason
I didn't expect it.
the only reason I would recommend this, well, there's two reasons. Number one, the artist. 3 reasons actually now, as I keep counting. The writer. And if I was going to, if somebody was like, I really like Batman, but I know nothing about him, or I just want to see, I like the Joker, and I like the Penguin, and I like this, and I like that. I like all these villains, but like, what can I read? Hush. Absolutely Hush. You got Loeb. Jeff Loeb. You have Jim Lee, who's by far my favorite comic book artist of all time, doing Batman, and it's basically a 12-issue run that he did in the Batman comic, where he just does a gauntlet run through pretty much every single one of the villains.
Just the entire Rogues Gallery.
Through the whole thing. And from a perspective of like, here, let me introduce you to Batman. I find that's... Some people don't like the story. Some people were like, it could have been better. But if you want an introductory to Batman,
it's pretty good.
Here you go.
My only issue with Hush is just the ending.
Yeah.
Because there's a big mystery behind it, and I feel like the mystery doesn't pay itself off.
Right.
Everything that happens around the mystery is great. Like you said, the whole Rogues Gallery, like figuring out each one, how they're involved and stuff like that. But yeah, the ending was just meh, in my opinion. But are there any, side tangent, are there any DC characters you're kind of like more leaning towards, or?
No, I mean, like, Batman is pretty classic. Like, that was another one, like, growing up. It was like, like, I watched the animated series, Batman Beyond.
Amazing.
I was big into Batman Beyond for a while there. And then, like, Justice League Unlimited.
So good.
Right? They were I still really, like, think that DC just needs to stop trying to make movies the way that Marvel does and just stick to the awesome, like, animated shows. Because that's where they tend to excel in my mind. Like, 100%. The Harley Quinn series is excellent. Justice League was always fantastic, so it's like that's kind of like
they did such a almost in direct opposite of what Marvel was doing. They did a much better job with TV series. They did a much better job with animated series. They did a much better job with graphic novels. Like, it's like, I don't know why they then tried to converge and go back the other way. It's like you're kicking Marvel's ass over here. Stay here.
Like, stick to your strength, because you're doing really well with it, and now you're just putting out these sort of I haven't even seen a lot of the DC movies that have come out recently, just because I keep hearing such not great things about them. And it's just
you save your money. I mean, I'm gonna watch Black Adam just because The Rock.
Black Adam looks fun at least, or Shazam. I really did like Shazam.
I had issues with Shazam. I'm willing to see the second one, but the first one I was medium on, I guess I'll say. But no. But
I thought it was cute. Like, it was just kind of fun and lighthearted, which I really liked.
Which is fair.
Sometimes DC gets so
okay, tangent time. So that was my issue with Shazam, though, is that everything with Zachary Levi and all the kids was so happy-go-lucky, but then the monsters were terrifying. When he releases them in the room and they murder, that was terrifying.
It was a weird, that was strange. Yeah, I did like it, and I did love the sort of family element. I know my husband even came to me afterwards. He's like, I really like the foster family element. Like, you think we could foster kids one day? And I was like, we'll talk about that much later.
Only if they have superpowers.
If we can adopt a gang of superhero children, I'm into it.
Heck yeah.
But I liked that element of it. But to what you said there, it's definitely there was a weird tonal shift there that you could have done all of it one way or all of it the other, but that it just wasn't cohesive.
It was
but
weird.
I still liked it more than a lot of the DC movies.
Which is fair. I'll 100% agree with that. Dave, give us one more. Give us another one.
I'm just gonna say I'm surprised that unless have you got another one?
I have a lot. I have 3 more.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the last one I'm gonna get.
Okay. Oh, really? I thought you said you had 10.
I'm gonna just.
Okay. Sorry.
You can text me the list later.
So if you say you're a Spider-Man fan, and you say that Spider-Man's my favorite, if you have not read this, you are not a Spider-Man fan.
Okay, where are you going with this?
I'm so intrigued.
If you have not read Kraven's Last Hunt.
Oh yeah, okay. There we go.
I've heard you talk about
You have to have read Kraven's Last Hunt to say I've read Spider-Man.
Yeah.
For a second, I thought you were going to say Clone Sega.
Yeah,
as a joke of you have to suffer like how I suffered.
Yes. Well, that could be
something he would do.
That could be Series B.
Okay.
Read Kraven's Last Hunt and then read it.
Yes. Kraven's Last Hunt is such a departure from the happy-go-lucky Spider-Man comic.
Yep.
I've expressed this to Greg. I think I even mentioned on the podcast at one point. When I was collecting comics, those came out monthly, or you know, if you were lucky, maybe every 3 weeks.
Okay.
And so I'm reading them issue by issue, and just the story was just like, what? And when it was like, oh, Craven, oh, he's a loser villain. It was so intense, and it was, again, Mike Zeck did the art for it. It is by far one of my favorites. I don't think it quite stands up today to from a writing perspective. Like, I think it certainly if you wrote it now, could be better.
Sure.
But for its time, it was just
Like, just respect it as it is.
Yeah, it was amazing, and especially like the darker elements that they dealt with, and it was just so un-Spider-Man. But it is a fantastic run that ran between Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Web of Spider-Man. 6 issues, and it's by far, hands down, still today one of my favorite runs in Spider-Man.
So what do you mean by if you wrote it today? Because I actually think it holds up. Like, what are the things that you think put it down?
I think it in, I guess the way that I would have read it back then was dark.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as dark as some
That's
of the
fair.
stuff that I've seen come out now. It could have been like, if you really wanted to dive into some of the elements of that, like really get gritty, it would be so much grittier today than it would have been back then. But it was still just the story overall was amazing. It's the, in my opinion, the Spider-Man story.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's definitely one of the. I would agree. It's probably the best one out of a succinct storyline for sure, 100%.
Gonna add that to the list. Then.
Yeah, it's really. Oh yeah, it's really good.
I'm probably gonna add all these.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna read a lot of what you recommend too. So good job, Dave.
Yeah, good job, Dave.
Maybe we'll do a follow-up podcast to see what we thought of. We'll see who won the recommendation
Dave,
for it.
why did you recommend it?
It was so bad. Speaking of dark, this is my horror genre,
Okay, good.
more
Excellent.
darker
Love
thing.
it.
And again, I'm leaning away from Marvel. I'm going to Boom Studios, which is
Boom Studios,
they're very interesting. They do a lot more licensed comics. They actually do the Power Rangers comics, which is amazing.
Cool.
Side story, it's really good. But they do their own stuff too. So this is called Something Is Killing the Children.
Oh, I've read this one.
It's so good.
I
Okay.
read it because you talked about it on an episode of this podcast, and I bought the first 3
James
issues
Tynion
right
the
away.
Fourth and artist Werther Daldera. Like, it's such a good mix of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Stranger Things.
But way scarier.
Way scarier. Like it's but I feel like it really encapsulates that like new era of horror leaning stuff with like amazing art. I love the way
The
he
art's
draws.
Yeah, the art's so
The
good.
way he draws blood.
It's so visceral.
It's so visceral.
It's so good.
And the fact that like even in the title they're like, we're gonna kill children.
Yeah,
and
we're not fucking around.
No, and they brutally murder those children is such a good thing. And then you have this whole like John Wick-esque like what's the world around this thing.
This whole like secret society of demon slayers and stuff. Yeah,
so
excellent,
interesting.
So
So yeah, I didn't know you read it. So yeah, everybody else out there, you gotta go read
it.
this. It's really cool.
Absolutely read it.
Yeah, highly recommend. So sorry, are you done your recommendations or are you?
I can keep
I got a couple more. So
Okay.
we'll go back and forth now.
I would say like, one of my, I think comics wise, I think probably one of the best comics that they have that write the best, some of the best runs would be 2 comics would be Daredevil writes amazing, and the other one would be the X-Men. The X-Men write amazing stuff. I would say for me, the one that really stuck out from an X-Men perspective as you're kind of going along would be like Executioner Song was great in the sense of expand again. It always expands all the X-Men comics, but they always have these amazing stories of wrapping the whole universe. It's a good marketing ploy to get you to buy all the comics.
Sure.
Yep.
And wrap it all into one. But it was great because there was a shock at the beginning, and then it's trying to piece together who did it. Okay, now we know who did it, but only some people know who did it, and it's just like this back and forth. And it was just I thought one of the like a kind of under the radar story that they told that included some of your favorite villains like Apocalypse and Strife and like these people that normally get a lot of headlines, and it just was a story that just kind of, for some reason, I don't know why, just stayed under the waterline. But it was another great arc in a great comic in the X-Men that had great supporting art, and it. I thought it utilized a lot of the characters in a much better way than you see today, where it's like, somebody will jump in and is like, oh, hey, we need to get over there. And then, like, Nightcrawler will just jump in for, like, 2 frames of go, like, bamf and take them. And then you don't see Nightcrawler again for, like, the rest of the series.
Criminal underuse of Kurt Wagner.
Yeah, so it's just, it was, I thought, yet again, it was just, like, one of those, just under the radar ones that I really enjoyed as an X-Men story.
Cool.
Yeah. Speaking of X-Men, I'll go to my next one. So this one, I'm curious what you'll think about it, because I have a hard time, even though Dave and I like House of 10, Powers of X, reverse that. House of X, Powers of 10, yeah. Like, I've heard people say that if you don't know anything about X-Men, it can be confusing getting in there. But the one I'm going to recommend is Hellions by Zeb Wells and Steven Segovia. This is my comedy one.
Oh, okay.
And again, this is one that I was harassing Dave that he had to read because I liked it so much. So House of X, Powers of 10, set up the new mutant world. It was also very serious of like, we have a government and we have, trade relations.
Like terraform Mars.
Yeah, exactly, right? Meanwhile, Zeb Wells on Hellions was like, I'm just going to get the weirdest group of people together and have Sinister as the boss, and they're just going to have chaos. And that's all this is. And it's so funny. And it's funny, but it still has heart. Like there's actual even though they're doing like gag stuff where it's like somebody's get their head blown off for no reason, that type of thing. But they still have like character development.
It can still be heartfelt.
Yeah, exactly,
like
right?
Deadpool.
100%. I really feel like Zeb Wells does that really well. Like he's on Spider-Man.
Yeah, he's on Spider-Man right
He's
now.
doing a really good run. So really good writer. But yeah, highly recommend Hellions 2020 by Zeb Wells. Again, I'm curious to see what you think about it afterwards, because I have heard people say it's hard to get into X-Men. Which is funny that you say, like, I agree with you, X-Men, Daredevil, and a lot of these guys are like pillars of great storylines, but they also have a lot of baggage sometimes, which can get confusing. So.
The nice thing, at least for X-Men, is that they are kind of like a cultural thing to the point where, like, even if you're not reading Marvel comics, like, most people know the gist of what the X-Men are about, so, like, it's not like this weird... It's not like reading like Ghost Rider maybe is one that most a lot of people don't necessarily know unless you watch like the bad Nick Cage movie.
Yeah. Hey, back in the day, I loved those movies. So anyways,
I saw the first one.
The first one was great. We don't talk about the second one.
I never saw the second one.
What second movie? I don't know what you're talking about.
Nick Cage and Eva Mendes doing things with demons. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's another funny part about the Hellions one is like the only one I knew the only 2 characters I knew in this book were Psylocke and Sinister. I had no idea who the hell anybody else was. So this isn't going to be like your Cyclops, Wolverine, Colossus situation. Like there's a lot there. I'm like, there's a person called Orphan Maker. And like and Nanny and stuff like that, and it's just like, what is happening here? It's a great read though. Yeah, he's the best. Dave, give us the last one.
Daredevil. Really hard if you go back to like volume 1, trying to find like specific storylines outside of like Miller.
I did read the Miller.
Outside of Miller, there was some good stuff. I would say like right around when I started collecting comics, because they introduced a character by the name of Typhoid Mary.
Yep.
That section of that was great. It was drawn by, I know you don't like Romita, but I love him.
He has his moments.
He has his moments. But I would say, like, if I was gonna recommend Daredevil, somebody came to me and said, like, I really want to read Daredevil. This stuff looks like a mess back here. There's like so many comics. I don't know. Then I would start you on volume 2. That was the first. It's well known as Bendis's run, but the first 6 issues were actually written by Kevin Smith.
Like Kevin Smith.
Clerks
Kevin Smith?
Yes.
What the hell?
And drawn by, who used to be, I think he was definitely creative controller, maybe CEO, was Joe Quesada.
Oh, wow.
Did the art. And it was called, I believe it was called Guardian Angel. And basically it's like Daredevil trying to protect a baby. And people are trying to get the baby or kill the baby.
What the hell?
And it's just like, it's 6 issues. People die.
Wow.
It was amazing. Like I grabbed it, couldn't stop reading it, and then once Kevin Smith finished, Then Bendis jumped on, and then it was just like, you can read, like, you want to read a run? That's like 100 some odd issues of Daredevil, and they touch on everything, and there's so many great moments. The artists that they picked to come in, like Alex Maleev and just Mac, can't remember his first name. He's a painter.
Okay.
He did a bunch of issues. Like, it is by far, if you want consistency and length, it's a great run. But it's funny how everybody's always like, oh, this is Bendis's, and it's like, it started with these
Kevin
6
Smith,
issues by
yeah.
Kevin Smith.
That's wild.
That
Yeah.
were
That's so
just
funny.
amazing.
I didn't know Kevin Smith wrote like comics.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, I guess I should have figured because like I used to watch Comic Book Men sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So mine, my last one, I did drama was my final genre.
Okay.
It does definitely have a lot of action and
Sure.
some comedy and whatnot. And I can't believe we both did Daredevil for our last one.
I love it.
I never would have guessed because, like, again, like you said, Daredevil's not one of the pillar, but he's so good. He has
I
so
love
many good.
Daredevil.
He should
Should be.
I love
People that aren't
Daredevil.
reading Daredevil comics, especially right now,
Yes.
should be reading
I
Daredevil
actually
comics.
only read this 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
And because Dave
Pester.
pestered me, it's amazing.
Okay.
It's
Hit me,
Daredevil
let's go.
2019 by Chip Zdarsky and Marco Cicchetto. I
Okay.
love his art, by the way.
Yes.
But the reason why this is so good, I feel like it kind of what I was saying about the Batman one is it's such a good mix of paying homage to older readers and older comics, meanwhile still having a lot of new stuff that they're adding in, changing the formula a little bit and whatnot. I will admit it starts a little bit slow, but once you get over that like first 2 and really get into the depths of it, I was like, this is blowing my mind.
Okay, awesome.
I think the great part about it was, it really delves into like what does it mean to be Daredevil, and not even just Daredevil, but what does it mean to be a superhero, and like how does justice apply to vigilantes, and and what does it mean to do what's legal versus what's right.
Right.
Huge plot in that.
I love that kind of stuff too. Those blurred lines
Yep.
of like what is justice versus like legality or
Yep.
something like that. Like all those really gray areas. Like that gets me. That gets me good.
Really good. And then my other favorite part about this is how he uses Fisk as a character foil for him. Because when you really think about it, they are 2 sides of the same coin.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of, they both loved Hell's Kitchen, but one went to the I'm gonna try to save it, whereas the other one's like, this is what it
Yeah.
is, and I love it for what it is. And I'm
it
like,
exists this way, and the only thing you can do is harness it. Versus
Yeah.
it has potential, and we need to see that potential through.
yeah, but while you have Daredevil kind of like losing his Daredevil persona, you have Kingpin trying to grow his persona beyond what it was, and running into new issues of trying to work within like the legalities of like evil,
Right.
legal but
Like-
evil.
Like lawful evil.
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
chaotic,
exactly,
like,
right?
the
That's what it really was, and like they don't intersect all the time, but when they do, it's always fascinating to see how they reflect each other and whatnot. And like the whole run is just there's so many things that happen. I will admit the King in Black intersection was a little awkward,
Yeah.
but Zdarsky found a good way to make it work.
And I have to say, like, that's one of the reasons or with the number of these like miniseries and stuff that come out, these like world-changing events that come out, is the timing of some of these are so horrible because they'll somebody's writing a great run of comics and it's going great, and then all of a sudden it'll get to this point and it's like, oh crap, we got to stop doing this, do 2 issues that reflect on whatever the hell's going on over here, and then move forward. And I wish they would do it more like, which I'm surprised that neither one of us recommended Immortal Hulk, because Immortal Hulk was just like, what's going on over there? Yeah, whatever. It just kept writing.
I'll get to that in a second, but and then I think in the Elektra in this run, I think is amazing. But like the thing I really like about it was how much it really, because one of the most famous storylines, which I'm surprised you didn't recommend. I know you recommended Daredevil, but I'm surprised you didn't do the Frank Miller Daredevil because it's so iconic, but it's so aggressively 80s.
It is,
in the sense of like how edgy it is. It's like Lethal Weapon cranked up to like 12. But like I love.
It was the easy pickings.
It's
one.
true. It's
I gave it Craven last time. I had to do something.
Yeah, that's fair. But like the amount of stuff they talk about from that era, but then modernize it and like continue on to it was really cool. But yeah, that's the one I really recommend anybody out there definitely check it out. It's really good. And
I have been meaning, like lately, I've even said to my husband a couple times, I'm like, I gotta read more Daredevil because I know he's gonna show up in She-Hulk,
Yeah.
and I love me some Matt Murdock. So.
hell yeah. Charlie Cox, I think is his
Yeah, Charlie
name.
Cox. I love Charlie Cox, but just generally Matt Murdock as a character to me
Yeah.
is super interesting. So
I was gonna do Immortal Hulk for my horror one.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't is because I feel like I don't know. I don't know as a new reader how you would enjoy it because
Okay.
I feel like for
The
me
Hulk was so different.
well
Like,
Yeah,
he was
exactly.
not-
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
not the Hulk.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like it's
Yeah.
completely different Hulk. Like
Oh,
the reason
You
why.
read it and go, what is this?
Who is this?
Yeah, like the reason I like Immortal Hulk because it really delves into like what does it mean to be a Hulk and like him as a force of nature versus his usual storylines like in Planet Hulk, which is just smashy smash,
Right.
you know, type of thing. And it is a lot more philosophical around it. So I don't know how like I mean if you're into that stuff, I think you would enjoy it.
Yeah,
but
I personally am, but
Yeah.
I can see how you would think like for a new reader that might be like a bit of a big
Yeah.
chunk to jump into.
yeah, and like I said, the horror aspect of it, like it's very body horror, which isn't. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
love it.
it's a lot of people would not enjoy
Yeah,
that.
that's
So
fair.
I find it a kind of a hard recommendation in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'll probably read it anyway just for fun though.
Yeah, no, for sure. As you get more and more
Yeah.
into comics, for sure, I highly recommend. But especially comparing Planet Hulk versus Immortal Hulk,
Just to see the
just to see the contrast is pretty insane. But yeah, what do you think of my list, Dave? Anything else you notice other than Immortal Hulk?
No, I would say there was a couple things. I still have to get to Strange Academy at some point because I do love the art or the artist. It's something that I would probably read like on the side. It's just like, hey, I'm not like super serious about this, but it's like something I would read just for purely
Yeah.
entertainment. Wasn't surprised by I would have laid down Hellions and Strange Academy as recommendations, but I mean there were a couple there that like those two. I just recently got into Hellions. Great recommendation. It's very funny. The art was great.
Yep.
It just has so many elements of like this is Suicide Squad done better.
Oh, 100%.
It's just so good.
Yeah. There's a couple that long-term readers are going to be like, you totally missed this. Like, for example, Dark Knight Returns
Yeah.
and Frank Miller's run on Daredevil
Oh, yeah.
and whatnot. I also would have thrown in there, you know, there's a couple more Batman ones again, like Red Sun. Actually, that's a Superman one. Red Sun Superman is actually pretty good if you want to delve into Superman and whatnot. But it's
But
funny.
I mean, it's hard. Like I said, like when you talk about consistency, if you look at the X-Men, you have like Executioner Song, you have the Mutant Messiah. Messiah Complex, basically, House of M. Like they've just like X-Men. Just like when they do typically, I'm not gonna say they're 100% awesome all the time, but typically when they bang out a storyline, it's good.
Yeah.
It's good, and they repeatedly do it.
Well, I mean,
over and over
but then you have like AVX, and there's been some misses. So.
Lately, I would say
It's a lot of averages.
Yeah, law of averages, 100%. When you've been writing since the 60s, you know, there's going to be a couple stinkers. Any questions you have for us about any comics?
I don't think so. You guys are so good at like, I mean, I listen to the podcast a lot already, so like I always kind of like in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, if I'm picking a read, I'm like, what would Dave and Greg?
No, we appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Any final thoughts, Dave?
No, I would just say like, again, I know it's intimidating when it comes to, when you're looking at something who's like, oh, this was created in, the 40s or the 50s. There's a lot of material here. Just if you don't have somebody to recommend something for you and you're really into, say, a comic that we didn't mention at all, something like Fantastic Four, just grab something.
Yeah.
Just grab it and read it.
Oh, yeah.
Google is obviously a great place to look for stuff.
There's a lot of really good like lists or articles that I checked out that just say like here's some good, so not even necessarily here's a good like issue or whatever to start with, but here's a good way of deciding.
Yeah.
Just bang that really loud. Which I think is a better way to go about it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we usually land a lot Marvel focused, but I mean, there's a lot of good stuff on the DC side, like Blackest Night for
that's a
Jeff
good
Johns' run on Green Lantern was amazing. There's some really, really good stuff over there as well that we're maybe not just as familiar with. But like I said, the biggest recommendation is just pick it up and read it.
Yeah.
Give it a chance. It's not just punchy where's spandex. There's there's some really, really good stories buried in there.
Yeah, and I think it's never been a better time to get into comic books, right?
No, I would agree with that for sure, especially with the accessibility of it. Like, we were talking about the Marvel Unlimited app, and like even that on the app, they have here's the reading guides for if you want to read, the House of M stuff, or here's a reading guide if you want to, with the new Marvel shows that come out. They're like, here's your intro to She-Hulk, or here's your intro to Miss Marvel or whoever it is. So like those are really good tools for people if you're not sure where to start. So
100%. No, that's a good point. So yeah, that's the end of our podcast. Thanks everybody for listening. Wherever you found us, make sure to follow. We try to do monthly podcasts. And let us know in the comments if you have any recommendations, anything we missed, and if we're completely wrong on something. We always enjoy that. Really quick, what's your TikTok handle?
I'm on TikTok at Melanie Plowright, so it's just my name. So it's MELANIE PLOWRAGHT, and you can watch me be sad and desperate for Bucky Barnes and talk about comic books that I read sometimes.
100%. I'll also link it in the description and whatnot, and we'll see you all next time.
See ya.
Bye.